All right, let's talk about sales mix for a few minutes. Sales mix happens when a company sells more than one product. So we want to know what percentage they sell of one product in relationship to what they sell to another product. So for example, if a company's unit sales are 80% printers and 20% computers, then its sales mix is 80 to 20. And sales mix is really important, as it says here, because different products often have different contribution margins. And companies want to sell products that have a higher contribution margin because that will ultimately earn them more profit. So here in this example we have two products, lawn mowers and lawn tractors, and they both have the same amount of sales volume, which is 1,000 units. So I want you to think about which one you would prefer to sell. If they sell $250,000 in lawn mowers and $300,000 in tractors, variable expenses are slightly higher for lawn mowers, so their contribution margin is only $100,000 or 40%. Lawn tractors, on the other hand, have a lower variable expense, higher selling price, so the contribution margin is a bit higher at 55%. We can also look at the combined contribution margin for both of them. And we'll click down here. So you would want to sell more lawn tractors because it carries the higher contribution margin. Now we can look at the average total contribution margin ratio combined from all products. And the way we do that is we take the contribution margin for all products of $265,000 divided by the $550,000 in sales, and that gives us 48%. So the question down here is, how will average total contribution margin change if Jones sold 1,500 lawn tractors, all other factors held constant? So now they're going to sell 1,500 lawn tractors instead of 1,000. And let's see what happens here. Okay, now our sales for lawn tractors go up 450,000. Contribution margin for tractors goes up to 247,000. So now my total contribution margin, the average, goes up as well to 50%, 347.5 over 700,000. So we've had an increase just for selling more products with a higher contribution margin ratio. We get a higher overall contribution margin percentage. Okay, so we can also compute break even in sales for a company that sells more than one product. Before we kind of had a simplistic look at break even sales, but we can calculate that by using the weighted average contribution margin of all products, which is the weighted average contribution margin is the sum of the weighted contribution margins per product. Let me explain what I mean there. So for example, I have a company here and they sell two products, DVD players and TVs. And we can see here the contribution margins for each of those. And we also see the sales mix percentage down here at the bottom. So they're selling 75% DVD players, 25% TVs. So all we need to do is take the unit contribution margin for each, multiply that times the sales mix percentage. So unit contribution margin for DVD players was $200, sales mix was 75%. So multiply that. Unit contribution margin for TVs was $500, but the sales mix is only 25%. So if we do that math, we get a weighted average unit contribution margin of $275. Then we can take our fixed costs divided by that weighted average unit contribution. That means that we need to sell 1,000 units in total to break even. Well then, how do we know how much of each we need to sell? Well, if we need to sell 1,000 units and we sell 75% as DVD players, that means we need to sell 750 DVD players, and 25% of our sales mix is for TVs. That means we need to sell 250 TVs. Now, it says at this level, total contribution margin will equal fixed costs of $275,000. And you can do the math there to double check that. We can also look at break-even sales in dollars, and it says this only works well if the company has a few products. If you think of a company like GM or 3M, which has over 30,000 different products, we would have to calculate 30,000 different unit contribution margins. So when there are many products, we need to calculate the break-even point in terms of sales dollars for divisions or products, not individual product lines, not individual products. So here we have an example. Let's assume Kale Garden Company Supply has two divisions, indoor and outdoor plants. They're asking us to compute the sales mix as a percentage of total dollar sales rather than units sold, and to compute the contribution margin ratio. Okay, let's take a look. Alright, so we've got our indoor and outdoor plant division. We've got sales, variable cost, contribution margin. So we've gone ahead and calculated the sales mix percentage. So we take the total division sales, which was $1 million, and we'll take each division sales and divide it by that total sales of $1 million. So indoor plants is 20%, and outdoor plants is 80% of this particular company's sales. Then we take our contribution margin ratio of each, so 80,000 for the indoor plant division, divided by 200,000 of sales. That gives us a contribution margin ratio of 40% for indoor plants. And we can do the same here for the outdoor plant division. 240,000 divided by the 800,000 gives us a 30% contribution margin ratio. And we can do that for both products as well, added together. So if our total fixed costs are $300,000, we can go ahead and calculate the weighted average contribution margin ratio for each division and the break-even point. So we'll go back to the indoor plant division, take that 40% contribution margin ratio, multiply it times the 20% sales mix percentage, add that to the outdoor plant division contribution margin ratio multiplied by its 80% sales mix percentage, and that gives us a weighted average contribution margin ratio of 0.32. Take our fixed cost divided by that 0.32, tells us we need to sell $937,500 in order to break even. And then we can multiply that number back out by the sales mix percentage for each. So with sales of $937,000, sales mix of 20/80, Kale must sell $187,500 from the indoor plant division, $750,000 from the outdoor plant division. And now it says there in the next bullet point, if the sales mix between the division changes, the weighted average contribution margin ratio will also change. So remember, a company would prefer to sell products that have a higher contribution margin ratio. Let's do a quick sample problem together. This says Presto Candle Supply Company makes candles. The sales mix is a percentage of total sales of each of its three product lines. They sell birthday candles 30%, standard tapered candles 50%, and large scented candles 20%. And then it gives us the contribution margin ratio of each. It says what's the weighted average contribution margin ratio, and what if the company's fixed costs are $440,000 per year. Alright, you might want to take a minute, see if you can figure that out on your own, and then we're going to run through it here real quickly. So we're going to need to take the contribution margin ratio of each times the sales mix percentage of each. And real quickly, we've got that. Contribution margin ratio of birthday candles was 10%, 30% sales mix. Multiply those two together, that gives us 3% for birthday candles. Do the same for the tapered, 20% contribution margin ratio times 50% sales mix. And then large scented, 45 contribution margin ratio times 20%. So the weighted average contribution margin ratio then will be 22%. And if the company's fixed costs are $440,000 per year, what is the dollar amount for each type of candle that must be sold to break even? Okay, so let's take those fixed costs and divide it by that 22% weighted average contribution margin. That tells us our break even point is $2 million. Then we just multiply that $2 million times each product's sales mix percentage. And that tells us we need to sell $600,000 in birthday candles, $1 million in standard tapered candles, and $400,000 in large scented candles.